Author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Politics is ripe with the potential for surprise. Talk of a Hillary comeback is making the rounds. Speculation is rife that Biden won't make it to 2024. As the saying goes, anything can happen, and it usually does. But how prepared are the American people for the turmoil sure to follow in the wake of such Washington upheaval? Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network. On this week's show, can Donald Trump pull the electoral rabbit out of the hat and reclaim the presidency in 2024? Will Joe Biden face an impeachment if the GOP gets its hands on the House? And a whole lot more. I'd like to take a brief moment to say a special thank you to our listeners in Knoxville, Tennessee on WETR 760 AM and 92.3 FM. Thanks for being part of the team. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Will he or won't he? Well, only Donald Trump himself and perhaps his hairdresser knows whether he'll be taking a run at the White House in 2024. But pick any pollster you want, and the odds certainly seem to favor the 45th president's comeback. Following this roller coaster ride has been Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief and analyzer of all things poll-related, Lisa K. Donna. Welcome back to the show, Lisa.
Good to be here, Mark.
So what's the skinny, Lisa? Is he going for it? And perhaps more importantly, how is the political world reacting to that?
Well, I just want to go on record as saying last year, I think during one of our C5 shows, I asked the entire panel, how many think President Trump will run again? And everyone said no, except me. So I just want to point out that maybe I was onto something. And indeed, you know, the January 6th thing was a classic case of the Democrats overplaying their hand. I mean, when Kamala Harris compared January 6th to 9/11 and Pearl Harbor Day, that I think that just about did in most conservatives.
Yeah, I think it's, clearly that's the line of attack because they don't have policy to run on. They don't have a strong legislative year behind them. And it's no coincidence that Joe Biden's goals for 2022 are exactly the same goals as he had for 2021 because he didn't complete any of them. So yeah, January 6th will be for the Democrats at least, that'll be what they attempt to rub down the prospects of Donald Trump.
Well, but going forward, you know, we have to remember it doesn't matter what the Democrats think of Donald Trump. It only matters what the Republicans think because they're the ones that nominate him. And it doesn't look like he's, you know, losing any ground with his base. In fact, you know, I wrote that the best advertisement for a Donald Trump comeback is Joe Biden. I mean, he's given him so many things to run on. You know, today we just have news that New York City has agreed to permit illegal aliens to vote. And, you know, and there's Afghanistan, there's inflation, there's a supply chain, and then there's the one he was going to fix, COVID. I mean, it's just all turning out so horribly for Biden.
Yeah, coming up to the 2020 election, it was a question of, we've got Donald Trump, who's a known quantity. And then, of course, you've got Joe Biden, who, despite having run for president for the better part of 30 years, is still unknown for how he will be in the White House. But now we've had almost a whole year of Joe Biden, and America's seen what he can and, more importantly, can't do. And I think you're right. You've got Afghanistan, inflation. I really don't think that people who were voting just to get rid of Donald Trump now have that same safety net of, well, at least Joe Biden's an unknown and he couldn't be any worse, could he?
Well, let me just give you a poll number that, you know, Rasmussen Reports does the daily presidential tracking poll. And so, you know, they always look at where the previous president was in the previous year. Well, today, for instance, and we are recording this on the 10th of January, we have Biden at 41% approval rating. The same time during his presidency, Donald Trump was at 44%. That really is very telling.
It is, and it's quite something because the pollsters now, they seem to be shying away from these questions about Joe Biden's performance. And Kamala Harris is even more so. I think it's an interesting aside, if I may, Lisa, that the Time Person of the Year that ran for 76 years decided this year not to do it. Now, bear in mind who won last year was Donald Trump, ending Obama's multi-year reign at the top. And it seems that Donald Trump was about to win again this year, so they've decided to cancel themselves, which is should tell you something.
Well, I wrote for Liberty Nation that if you think Donald Trump is going to go quietly into the night, you're sadly mistaken, or you're not on his mailing list, which is, flooding your inboxes in what I wrote was Noahic proportions. I mean, it's just an avalanche. And now they're starting to talk about his first rally of the year. And we're quite a ways from 2024, but his first rally of the year is, guess?
Arizona.
Correcto. And none of this is by happenstance. He's saying save America from Joe Biden. I mean, he's really mounting a comeback. There's just no two ways about it, Mark.
Absolutely. But there's certainly an advantage to Donald Trump not coming out and saying it, that, I'm here, I'm running for in 2024. There's an advantage to that, isn't there?
Well, I think actually the reason is that it has to do with campaign finance laws. So right now, a lot of the money that he raises goes to a PAC, or it goes to, in many cases, it goes to the Republican, the RNC, Republican National Committee. So I think it really has to do with financing and timing and the campaign laws.
Yeah, I think with a lot of that money that's coming in, because he really is a campaigning machine and a money-making machine in terms of electoral donations. But that money can then be used to support candidates pretty much of his choice, because he does still hold the big stick in terms of the RNC. So he could push America First or even MAGA candidates into a position ahead of their primary competitors, couldn't he?
Yeah, and let me ask you a question.
Please.
Who are the ones that really put Joe Biden over the top? The demographic. The demographic group.
It was suburban women.
Yeah, and so now I think Twitter did Trump a big favor. He's not on Twitter anymore. Those tweets are fading into the sunset rapidly. And so these suburban moms are now the very same women who are, beefing at school board meetings, I'll just put that nicely, and are on the FBI terrorist watch list. I mean, they might be rethinking their vote.
Well, yeah, in 2020, they were mildly miffed at some tweets. In 2021, they're potential domestic terrorists. So before 2024, we have 2022, of course, the congressional elections. What kind of influence do you think that Donald Trump will have on the 2022 results?
Well, clearly he's trying to, line up the people he likes, the America First candidates. In Pennsylvania, that's turning into a problem, I think, where Pat Toomey was. You've got two more establishment. I really don't know how Dr. Oz can be actually considered a Republican. He's trying to make sure he stacks the legislature with the people that he is fond of. And then, of course, there are some people who have turned around. There was Lindsey Graham who said, I've had enough, blah, blah, blah. Now he's down at Mar-a-Lago playing golf with Trump.
Yeah, I think Trump's used his year or so out of office quite wisely. He's been building alliances with those who were very much against him, especially after January 6th. Whether that was because of firmly held beliefs or because they felt it was politically expedient to distance themselves from Donald Trump. So he's building bridges there. And of course, he's promoting certain candidates through his press release, his statements. And so he's building up, I think, what you could call a body of loyal followers, people who do believe in what he believes in politically. And if he were to return to the White House, he'd have a very strong legislative body behind him, as opposed to clearly Nancy Pelosi has the full Democrat team whipped and in place because they tend to vote en masse, along with Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, of course. But if he's hoping to have any legislative substance in the next session, he'll have to have a majority, and that majority can't be a divided one. It needs to be something that's fully behind him for him to achieve what he needs to achieve in the last term that he's allowed to run for.
Well, look, he's building a political war machine, and the Democrats, I think, are shaking in their boots. They'd rather face anybody other than Trump. And which is why I think so much is going on in the courts now. The New York State U.S. Attorney Letitia James, I think, has now issued a subpoena for Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. I mean, they're really trying to pull out all the stops to do anything they can to prevent him from running. And, Mark, I don't know if 45 is going to become 47. I mean, history is not on his side, as if we look back at presidents that tried to run for a second term with a hiccup in the middle. But, you never know. I mean, who really knows? Trump is an unusual political animal, and, he's the despised nemesis of the left, but he's still got a strong base, and you can't take that away from him. And maybe the Democrats think they had cornered the market on the comeback kid, but I don't know. We'll have to see about that.
We'll be following the comeback kid very close at libertynation.com. Lisa K. Dunner, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Don't go anywhere. Later in the show, we're looking at the filibuster showdown on our special Talking Liberty segment. But up next, what's the beef in Kazakhstan? We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
With news that the Defense Department fears the uprising of the American people, it's worth casting an eye over to Kazakhstan, where civil unrest is unfolding and leaving a precarious political situation in its wake. While someone with their ear to the ground on all things defense is former Undersecretary of Defense Controller Dave Patterson, who joins us now to delve deep into all matters Kazakh. Welcome back, Dave.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's good to be with you. And I was not the Undersecretary, but the Principal Deputy, but had half the money. So I think that worked out well for me.
That counts for twice as much, though, in terms of credence, I believe. So what's the situation in Kazakhstan now, and how did it start?
Well, Mark, the situation right now is, according to the Financial Times, about 164 people have been killed, 8,000 have been arrested, and the disturbances and rioting continues.
Okay, and what prompted the beginning of this unrest?
Well, the beef kind of started this time among the Kazakhs when the government had control over the price of liquid petroleum gas, which all of the Kazakhs, or a great number of the Kazakhs, use in their automobiles to get to and from work and travel. And when the government took the cap off that had it artificially low, then prices soared, and the nation is not a particularly affluent nation, and that caused significant harm for the people. And so consequently, they were not happy. And so as the prices soared, they become more and more up in arms, and they took to the streets. And the government then put the cap back on again. But nonetheless, the brouhaha had started, and it's not the only gripe they have, Mark. Actually, they see the disparity between the ruling elites and the affluence that they are accustomed to, and the average salary for a Kazakh. Kazakh is about $580 a month. And that just doesn't set well with them. And so consequently, you've had this disturbance.
Now, you say this disturbance. Is this almost normal behavior for these former Soviet bloc countries? Because obviously they're pretty much born in revolution.
I think it's what you can expect when you have former Soviet bloc countries that have never, ever given up this very strong central government approach to their people. They see that democracy is getting further and further from their grasp. They are not economically doing well, and so they're more than likely going to show their displeasure by rioting in the streets. It's not always that particular motivation, but for the most part, it's what has happened previously.
Again, how much influence does Vladimir Putin have here, and what stance is he taking towards the whole episode?
Well, Vladimir Putin has a great deal of influence, and he exercises that influence on the former Soviet bloc countries that belong to the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a parallel to NATO for former Soviet bloc and Warsaw bloc countries that wish to join. And so it's through that organization that his influence is exerted.
And how has he been displaying that influence so far?
Well, I think that he is displaying it in Kazakhstan by sending 2,500 troops to secure the airport and other federal buildings in the capital. And he has said publicly that he is more than willing to enter into countries to help them maintain order and discipline when things go awry for them, the former Soviet bloc countries.
Okay, now is there likely to be any American involvement, do you think? And if so, would that be more to do with, as Biden likes to flex, the financial sanctions, or would it be other means through perhaps troop deployment or advisory committees, things like this?
Well, as I said in my article in Liberty Nation, I think today it's running, there's nothing for the United States geopolitically or in any other way by getting involved. And this is one of those times when I think that the Biden administration would be better served by finding a seat in the grandstand and watching how all of this is going to play out.
Do you think that Biden's willing to do that, or is he in such a position that he needs to regain some international credibility?
Oh, no, I think that he would be more than happy to do that. I mean, when you consider he's got his hands full in Ukraine this week. And so I don't think he's looking for other places to be prominent.
Okay. So do the events in Kazakhstan, do they herald any other political or military issues in the region?
Well, interesting you should mention that, because yes, they do, actually. This is an opportunity for Putin to re-exert his influence in Central Asia. Now, this plays off of China, who sees Central Asia as absolutely critical to their Belt and Road Initiative. And so for the Kazakhstan government to rely on President Putin to come in and help just demonstrates the close relationship that they have with the Kazakhs have with Russia, and that they didn't go to China for help.
J. David Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark. It's always good to be with you.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM, 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Later in the show, we talk filibuster madness and free healthcare for illegals in California. If you thought the talk of partisan impeachment was gone along with Donald Trump's exit from the White House, think again. In a move that literally anyone except for the Democrats could have seen coming, moves may be afoot to make President Joe Biden suffer after 2022. Now, is this a realistic probability, or is it all to bring in those dollar donations? Well, to find out, we welcome back to the show the indefatigable national columnist and co-producer of the Conservative Five, Sarah Cowgill. How goes it, Sarah?
You know, it's going pretty well. A little chilly, but it's winter.
Of course, of course. Now, Sarah, the first things first. Who's talking about impeaching Joe Biden, and what's the basis for it?
You know, the interesting thing is there's more of there's a drumbeat within the population, and you can overhear that pretty much anywhere. Your coffee shops and your pubs, and just random people, wondering if now is the time to impeach Joe Biden. A lot of people are more worried about invoking the 25th Amendment. That's never going to happen with his cabinet. It just won't. But politician-wise, Senator Ted Cruz has been a little bit more vocal about it than most Republicans. I think most Republican elected officials are being holding their cards kind of close to the vest. nobody knows what's going to happen in 2022. So that could be a non-starter anyway. But Cruz is out there talking about impeaching Joe Biden, and I'm not sure why quite yet.
So all this would really depend on whether Republicans gain a majority after the 2022 congressional elections. And I think it's an important question is whether this would have any support from Democrats if it went ahead. Now, it seems unlikely on the surface because who besides, as we saw in Donald Trump's 2 impeachments, who but a few diehards would vote against their own president? But how much damage could Joe Biden do to the Democrat brand if left in office for a further 2 years? I think that's an important issue. What is your thoughts?
Well, I don't see any Democrat voting to impeach on Afghanistan or the handling of COVID, because technically they're not really impeachable offenses. What is impeachable is, opening the border and allowing, the harboring of illegal aliens. Now that is an impeachable offense. Lying under oath, that's how they got Bill Clinton in the 90s. That's how Republicans, and Republicans took that way too far. So it's not the first time to see somebody use the impeachment process as a battering ram to, earn political points. It did not happen, ironically, during Watergate, which was also impeachable offenses. What happened in the Watergate scandal with President Nixon? And after the hearings and after the reports were filed, the Republicans went to President Nixon and just said, "Look, for the party, you need to step down." And that's what he did. He didn't go through the impeachment process. Now, add hubris to paranoia, and you've got Bill Clinton, who's not going to step down, and then you had Donald Trump, who wasn't going to step down. They can ask Joe Biden to step down. That would be the only way they can save face on this. They could not afford to vote against their own sitting president. If you've seen what has happened to the people who voted against their sitting president, with Liz Cheney and some other folks, Mitt Romney, this is what happens to people. They're in cold storage now, basically.
Okay, so as they say, all's fair in love, war, and politics. Now, do you think that the Democrats are starting to regret their moves in the Trump presidency, or did it serve its purpose in making it difficult for Donald to win in 2020? And is this the same strategy that maybe the GOP will be looking at here? I mean, it certainly helped rake in donations for Democrats. So as the elections draw closer, perhaps campaigning on this idea would be a tool for pulling in those donation dollars.
Well, I think they have no choice but to campaign on that idea. It's like tit for tat. You want to say, we're not going to take it. We're not going to stand down to this group of, whoever is in what position at the White House. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. But the country grew weary of the impeachment hearings and all of the craziness that went on with them. And I'm not sure that, that the fiscal conservative Republicans want to waste any more taxpayer dollars. I think they would rather put pressure on the administration and the party to handle their, their president in their own way and ask him to step down and figure out how to remove him without damage.
Well, of course, that would lead to President Kamala Harris, who, let's be fair, if the polls are to be believed, which they aren't always, but with this kind of striking negativity she has, I mean, she's 14 points underwater at least. And this is not just one poll. This is an aggregate of all polls, puts her 14 points underwater. Can they really risk bringing her in ahead of any set of elections that would put the balance of power into play?
Well, if you take a look at it just from afar, just like you're on the outside looking in, I don't see them. I see them replacing Ms. Harris. I don't think they have a choice. Now, how are they going to do that? I have no idea. They're going to have to offer something better, but I don't know what that is. And I in my little pea brain have thought this through, but they have had, years of trying to polish her up and make her shine, and it's not working. And they've got the big dogs on this, and it's not working. So I think you might see her stepping down to do something better somewhere else. And then it'll just be complete upheaval. But I could easily see Pete Buttigieg getting that second slot and then moving him into the top spot. They've got to figure out how to unload, the albatross that they have hanging around their neck. And that includes both of them.
Now, Sarah, the impeachment option isn't the only tactic that's being floated by the GOP and the GOP supporters. House Minority Leader McCarthy, he's been talking about stripping the senior Dems of their committee positions if the GOP gains the majority after 2022. So most notably, you've got Ilhan Omar, Adam Schiff, and Eric Swalwell. Now, I get the motivation here. Schiff, he lied constantly. Swalwell was playing nice with Chinese spies, apparently. And Omar seems to be on the opposite side of everyone. So is this fair play? Is turnaround fair play here?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's, it's like the big game of Risk is what it is. And they've got to somehow hobble the power. And in order to do that, you're just going to have to make a few enemies and whack them off at the knees and keep them from gaining any kind of power in those committees.
Sarah Calga, thank you ever so much.
Hey, thank you, Mark.
Coming up next, the filibuster, Medicare for illegals, and a First Amendment issue for big tech. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
It's all abuzz in the legal world this week. From the filibuster to healthcare for illegals, what to make of it all? And what are the ramifications for your liberty? We're once again joined by the uncaped constitutional crusader, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza Esquire, to help us unravel those particular details. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you for that introduction, Mark.
Not all heroes wear capes, Scott. Now, Scott, I want to talk about the filibuster. Obviously, after long-standing opposition to getting rid of the filibuster, Joe Biden, in his recent Atlanta, Georgia speech, said that time's up for the filibuster. What to make of it?
In a heroic move, I think Senator Chuck Schumer, along with his ally now, Joe Biden, are looking to cast off the chains of the filibuster that keep black people down in this country, Mark. That's clearly where we are with things.
You mean the chains of the filibuster that both Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden were lauding when the Republicans had control of Congress and the White House?
It sadly doesn't pass the laugh test, which you'd at least hope major changes in public policy would, and major changes in structural governance. There's a line that I think a lot of people know, but it can't be said often enough, which is that democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. And that's why, some of us take pains to correct people when the United States is referred to as a democracy and not the constitutional republic that it is. And that is what makes the United States such a beacon for liberty around the world. Just historically, is the rights of the minority. And that's what's going to be extinguished if the filibuster goes away. It seems too tempting for the Democrats in power, who've now, I think, in successive kind of legislative generations, advanced the death of the filibuster, restricting it and kind of crowding it into a smaller and smaller area of legislation until now we have the proposal to eliminate it altogether.
Although, of course, it would still take a majority vote, a straight majority, to remove the filibuster. And it seems that Joe Manchin has certainly spoken against it and seems unwilling to do so. And Kirsten Sinema has also, through her office, has said that she's unwilling to get rid of the filibuster. So that would mean 48 to 52, unless you think not only that, Republicans are willing to jump ship.
Not only that, but the Republicans are a majority of, Senate Republicans are a minority of 50. So it's one thing, even just rhetorically, to say that, if there were, 27 Republicans or something like that, or 33 Republicans who are hampering the will of the majority of the people, but it's not even that. It's literally half of the body.
It's a minority of 50%. Yeah.
It's quite striking, I think, and appropriate that's like, the hypocrisy just laid bare. It's a power grab. And I think you're probably right that that once again will be saved by Senators Sinema and Manchin from a horrible policy proposal. But we'll have to wait and see, I suppose.
Well, let's talk a bit more about power grabs. So California Democrats here now. Governor Gavin Newsom, he recently announced that part of his spending spree for the budget for 2024 and onwards, they'd be providing healthcare, fully paid healthcare, or CaliMed, or some such thing for everybody who is resident within the state. So that includes illegal immigrants. Now, of course, this is all under the bill, on the bill of the taxpayer. So is this even legal?
Oh, well, I don't think that the governor of California stops to worry about that when they're proposing legislation, or the governor of many states. They often do what they can get by with. What I would suggest to you, Mark, is the underreported part of that story is the galactically massive tax increase that they propose to pay for this. And it has already passed, by the way, its first hurdle in committee, I think, on its way to becoming law, which may face some stumbling blocks by some California Democrats who don't want to enact this massive tax increase, which is a gross receipts tax. And for people who don't know, businesses generally don't pay taxes on the total volume of the money that they take in, but they pay some tax on the profit that they take in. And so what happens with a gross receipts
turnover
tax,
is vanity, profit is sanity, as we say in the UK.
What the problem with this is, if you can imagine that the businesses with the smallest profit margins are the ones that are hardest hit. And those are the ones, if you think about what businesses do, the least fortunate people, depend on. It's the Walmarts and the discounters. It's not the high end, a Louis Vuitton store that charges $5,000 for a simple bag can afford a few more percentage points layered onto it. But the supermarket, whose profit margin is only 1.5 or 3% on an item, there's not much fat on the bone to cut from. So I think it's shocking, really, what it would do to the economy and the lives of Californians if it were to go through. And that's just, that's forgetting about forcing struggling Californians to pay for the health care of illegals who are already a drain on the system, of course.
To me, it seems as though this is a willful drawing in of illegals. So we have the border in such a state that in my living memory, it hasn't been this bad. Of course, the Biden administration hasn't released its year-end report, as it has been customary for the last 11 years. So that should tell you something by itself. But the idea that the borders are down and there's free healthcare and likely some other freebies in there as well for anybody who cares to make the journey north. So isn't this just adding more stress onto the infrastructure? And has infrastructure even being costed in, like more schools, for example? If you have an extra, well, for example, there were, I believe it's almost 2 million this year across the board. Now, not all those are going to California, but how many more children is that? How many more hospitals do you need? How many more schools do you need? I don't believe that's been factored in to this healthcare proposal, has it?
Mark, this kind of thinking about those incentives doesn't usually take place in California. That's some kind of antiquated style of analysis or lawmaking you're referring to.
Yes, I think we used to refer to it as analysis.
Yeah, there's
in the good old days.
They need an environmental impact statement, I think, to do anything. But I don't know about the economic impact statement of this and whether or not it would accommodate those incentives being realized. Can you imagine being a person who lives in Mexico with any kind of a serious health condition, knowing you could just illegally cross the border and get treatment for that thing? You'd have to do it. If any human being would do it, right? What are you going to say? Well, no, I have too much respect for the fence that millions of people have crossed in the previous, however many years. It's preposterous.
So one more question, if I may, Scott. Now, the shareholders, I believe, are pressing Google and YouTube to disclose any White House requests to scrub COVID-19 videos. This, to the onlooker, seems somewhat bizarre. Not from the shareholders' point of view, of course, but from the fact that it's coming from the White House. Your thoughts?
Well, the interesting component of this is that it might reveal those requests. And the reason why it might reveal them is a function of the law that would deny those publishers immunity from violating the First Amendment rights of the people who post the videos, if in fact they did so. So Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Merrick Garland, those folks will never have to pay out of their own pocket for any kind of violation of the First Amendment. Even if administration people got on the phone right to Google and said, pull that down, we don't want this information out there, that was a blatant violation of the First Amendment, they don't have to worry about, the taxpayers might have to pay a settlement if such a thing were proven, but not those individuals. Well, Google, as a company, may indeed have to pay out of pocket, and it's potential there could be some individual liability as well if they act in collaboration with the White House to deny people First Amendment claims. This, believe it or not, Mark, was settled in a case about the television show Cops, where the cameras would be brought into a home during a search warrant, and that was ruled to be basically they don't have qualified immunity from the wrongdoing they did with publishing that information. That's been analogized by some law professors who I've read on the topic. And so it's just a way that this might actually be exposed through like a side door. And that's why I thought it was an interesting story to bring to the table. It's been proposed as a shareholder initiative this week, and we'll have to see what happens.
Let me just clarify this, Scott. So what you're saying is that if this indeed happened, somebody within the administration asked Google or YouTube or any one of these companies that are affected by it to remove a video or a post as per a request.
We know that they've made those. Yeah. We know that they have made statements that they've said they've done that, Mark. Okay.
So if, however, Google or YouTube, for example, acted upon that request, that would be a violation of Section 230, because that would mean that they're acting as publishers. Is that correct?
Well, what it could mean is that they're violating the First Amendment rights of those people to act in concert with the administration to deny them their rights to speak publicly. And it's because of that potential liability, coupled with the denial of their rights, that would incur liability. And the whole point of it is, the reason why this might actually get purchased where some of the other, attempts to hold Google as like a government actor with respect to speech would not work is because of that financial liability that they may have incurred, and the attempt by shareholders to limit the financial liability that their company, they are shareholders who are putting forth this notion.
We'll definitely keep an eye on this story then, Scott. Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's it for this week on Liberty Nation Radio. My sincere thanks to our guests Lisa K. Donner, Dave Patterson, Sarah Cowgill, and Scott Cosenza, and of course to you for listening and being part of the team. One final thought to leave you with. Noted film director Joshua Oppenheimer once said, "Denial, panic, threats, anger, those are very human responses to feeling guilt." Now, it seems to me that the leading party is experiencing all of these negative emotions, certainly the panic, always the anger. Denial and threats are part and parcel of modern politicking. So the question that begs to be answered is, what are they feeling so guilty about? In a state of near constant panic is no way to run a country. One might assume they're in well over their heads. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fighting for freedom.
Daily tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and others.
I can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.